The decision to place God first is not just about obedience. It is about relieving the brain of pressure it was never designed to bear alone. Your cognitive patterns begin to change. Instead of rushing into the day in a panic, you begin to pause. Instead of reacting impulsively to emotion, you start to respond with intention. Your thoughts are filtered through a lens of wisdom, not just instinct. You begin to notice the difference between what feels urgent and what is truly important. And most importantly, you stop believing the lie that your value is measured by your performance or your productivity. You start to act from peace, not pressure. The frontal lobe, the area of your brain responsible for executive function, long-term planning, and self-control, begins to engage more frequently. It quiets the panic of the limbic system. That's not magic. That's alignment. You're aligning your biology with a deeper truth. You are not God. You were never meant to carry it all. When you put God first, you begin to feel again. You begin to breathe again. You begin to release. Your perception of time changes. You stop rushing. You start trusting. When you look at your plans, they no longer exist in a vacuum of control. They exist within the safety of divine timing. That mental shift creates a neurological foundation of security. You are not chasing. You are building, not for yourself, but in service of a greater purpose. And your brain loves purpose. It quiets down when it has direction. It stops scanning for danger when it knows what matters most. Even your relationships change. You stop needing people to validate you because your worth is rooted in something unshakable. You stop being triggered by criticism because you're no longer performing for acceptance. You're acting out of calling. You gain emotional resilience, not because you've hardened, but because you've grounded yourself in something deeper than your feelings. You trust something higher than your thoughts. That's mental freedom. That's emotional clarity. When God becomes the filter, your thoughts become less chaotic. Your choices become more consistent. Your vision becomes clearer. And your nervous system, it calms down. That doesn't mean life becomes easy. It means that your mind is no longer scattered trying to hold the pieces together by sheer willpower. You've given the burden back. And in doing so, you've reclaimed something powerful. Stillness, stability, a mind at rest. You stop identifying as the one who must fix everything. And you begin showing up as the one who trusts, listens, and moves with wisdom. That mental transformation starts the moment you put God first, not once, but daily. It is a practice, not a personality, a rhythm, not a rule. And over time, the brain learns that peace is not a place you visit. It's a place you live when your foundation is not built on control, but on surrender, certainly. Here's the expanded version of Key Point now, put to in 700 words, without adding any subheadings or keywords. Choosing to put God first is not a one-time emotional decision made during a crisis or a moment of inspiration. It's a continuous, often difficult act of discipline. It's a daily, deliberate choice that must be made regardless of how you feel, what your circumstances look like, or how convenient it may seem. This kind of commitment is not casual. It's not passive. It's not something that you fit into your schedule when you're not busy. It's something you build your life around. That requires structure. That demands sacrifice. And it doesn't always come with immediate rewards. In fact, sometimes it comes with silence, with delay, with discomfort. But that's exactly what makes it transformative. Discipline is what holds you together when emotion fades, when life becomes chaotic or uninspiring. Discipline keeps you rooted. And putting God first through discipline doesn't just look like grand spiritual gestures. It often looks like showing up in the quiet moments. It's choosing prayer instead of scrolling. It's choosing stillness instead of noise. It's choosing reflection over reaction. These are small decisions, but they reshape the internal architecture of your entire life. They create a framework of consistency that guides you even when your feelings shift and your motivation disappears. When people talk about putting God first, they often imagine only the spiritual or emotional layer. But in reality, it's very much a behavioral practice. You wake up and choose alignment. You face decisions and ask yourself who or what you're serving with those choices. You begin and end each day with intention. And this consistency is what sharpens your character. It forms the backbone of integrity, not because anyone's watching, but because you know who you're accountable to. That kind of mindset isn't built overnight. It's built through resistance, repetition, and relentless commitment. This commitment is especially tested in the mundane moments of life. when there's no applause, no recognition, no dramatic change, just the quiet repetition of doing what is right, honoring what is true, and obeying what you believe over and over again. That's where most people quit. They want the fire, the emotion, the breakthrough, but they don't realize that those outcomes are born from the soil of ordinary obedience. The discipline of putting God first doesn't always feel powerful, but it builds power within you. It doesn't always feel exciting, but it anchors you in a way that nothing else can. What separates those who thrive spiritually and mentally from those who burn out or drift isn't knowledge or talent, it's discipline. And it's in that discipline that you learn how to endure difficulty without falling apart. You learn how to stay grounded when everything around you is unstable. You build internal strength that isn't based on what others see, but on what you know to be real and unshakable. That strength is what allows you to act with clarity in moments of confusion. It's what allows you to stand firm when others compromise. It's what allows you to keep moving when the path isn't clear, because you're not moving based on what's visible. You're moving based on what's true. The mind naturally resists discipline, especially when there's no immediate reward. But over time, consistent practice shapes your mental framework. You become less reactive. You become more present. You become more deliberate. The voice in your head becomes calmer. Your thoughts become more focused. You stop chasing approval. You stop living from fear. Instead, you operate from a centered place. A place that isn't controlled by emotion or circumstances. And that centered place is only accessed through the daily disciplined practice of putting God first. This kind of life is not built in a moment of passion, but in the thousands of small, quiet decisions to stay aligned. And what makes it powerful is that it's not dependent on how you feel. You can feel tired, uninspired, even doubtful, and still show up. You can face resistance, face setbacks, face criticism, and still choose to keep God at the center. That is what shapes you. That is what transforms you. Not the big declarations, but the quiet consistency, the everyday obedience, the relentless choice to surrender your will for something greater. That is where real change begins. And that is where a life of strength, purpose, and peace is truly built. So here's the expanded version of Key Point Noe. 3. Extended to approximately 700 words without adding subheadings or keywords. There's something incredibly liberating about realizing that you don't need to control everything. That sense of surrender is not weakness. It is strength in its purest form. When you put God first, one of the most powerful internal shifts that happens is the release of control. And in that release, something remarkable takes place inside your mind and body. The tension that you've been carrying for so long, often without realizing it, begins to loosen its grip. You start breathing differently. You start thinking more clearly. You start feeling less exhausted by the effort of trying to force outcomes. Because when you no longer carry the belief that everything depends on you, your nervous system no longer has to stay on high, alert every second of the day. This isn't just a metaphor, it's a measurable physiological response. People who try to control every detail of their lives often experience chronic stress, tight muscles, poor sleep, and low energy. That's not coincidence. That's the body reacting to the burden of relentless pressure. And that pressure is usually rooted in fear, the fear of things going wrong, the fear of being hurt, the fear of failure, the fear of being out of control. But when you put God first, your mindset changes from trying to manipulate outcomes to trusting a plan. That's not always visible. And that shift has a real calming effect on the brain. When the mind is constantly trying to predict the future, it lives in a state of uncertainty. That uncertainty triggers anxiety, but faith acts as a kind of stabilizer. It doesn't remove all challenges, but it gives you a way to approach them that doesn't cost you your peace. You stop feeling like you need to anticipate every problem in advance. You stop obsessing over how things will turn out. You stop needing every answer right now because you've handed over the illusion of control. You've given it back to the one who sees more than you can, who knows more than you do, and who has no limitations. That kind of trust isn't built in a single moment. It's something that grows through experience. You begin to see little by little how not everything needs your intervention to work out. You begin to notice that some of the things you let go of actually turned out better than the ones you tried to force. You start to realize that surrender isn't laziness, it's wisdom. It's knowing when to act and when to wait. It's understanding that not every battle is yours to fight. Not every weight is yours to carry. Not every situation needs your constant mental attention. This release begins to transform your inner world. You become less reactive, less tense, less consumed by thoughts that loop endlessly in your mind. You begin to notice space inside yourself, space for quiet, space for peace, space for presence. You're no longer living 5 steps ahead. You're living here, now. And from that place of surrender, you start to make decisions that are not driven by fear or panic, but by clarity and conviction. You're not rushing. You're not proving anything. You're simply aligning your actions with what truly matters, not with what temporarily satisfies your need for control. There's something incredibly humbling about learning to let go. It reveals how much of your mental energy was wasted on trying to control things that were never in your hands to begin with. And it invites you into a rhythm of life that is gentler, more sustainable, and more honest. You begin to say no to things that used to trigger guilt. You begin to wait when your instinct is to hurry. You begin to rest even when the world says hustle. Because your compass has changed. Your stability is no longer built on what you can manage. It's built on what you can trust. And perhaps the most beautiful part of this surrender is the freedom it brings. Freedom from overthinking. Freedom from perfectionism. Freedom from needing to have all the answers. When you release control and put God first, you begin to live from a place of trust. You begin to let go of outcomes. You begin to embrace the unknown without fear. And that's when you start to truly live, not just survive. You wake up with less weight on your chest. You go to sleep without the noise in your head. You walk through your days with a stillness that doesn't come from having everything figured out, but from knowing that you don't have to. That's the power of putting God first. Not just as a belief, but as a way of being, certainly. Here's the expanded version of Key Point No. 4, written in approximately 700 words without any subheadings or keywords. When you put God first in your life, something begins to shift in how you respond to pain, struggle, and discomfort. Life doesn't magically become easier. The same challenges still show up, the same disappointments still occur, and the same losses still cut deep. But your relationship to those experiences changes completely. You stop viewing pain as something purely negative or meaningless. Instead, you begin to recognize that there is purpose within it. And when pain has purpose, it becomes bearable. It becomes something you can endure. It becomes something that can refine you instead of break you. Most people spend their lives trying to avoid pain at all costs. They run from it, numb it, hide it, or distract themselves from it. But the truth is, pain is inevitable. Whether emotional, physical, or spiritual, it will find its way into your life. And if your only strategy is to escape it, you'll find yourself exhausted and broken. But when God becomes your foundation, pain stops being the enemy. It becomes a teacher. It becomes a place where you discover who you really are and what you're truly anchored to. Endurance is not simply the ability to push through. It's the ability to remain rooted, focused, and clear even when everything around you feels unstable. And that kind of endurance doesn't come from willpower alone. It comes from having something deeper to hold on to, something that doesn't shift with your circumstances. When you put God first, you build your life on a truth that doesn't move. You train your heart and your mind to stay aligned even in suffering. That doesn't mean you won't feel pain. It means pain won't control you. There are moments in life when the pressure feels unbearable. When the situation doesn't seem to improve no matter what you do. When progress feels invisible and hope feels distant. In those moments, putting God first is not just an idea. It becomes a decision you must cling to with everything you have. It means choosing to believe there's still meaning even when you don't understand it. It means choosing to remain faithful when you feel forgotten. It means continuing to show up, continuing to pray, continuing to stay the course, not because it's easy, but because your faith is no longer based on feeling. It's based on commitment. This mindset transforms how you handle setbacks. When you face failure, you don't spiral into shame or self-hatred. You learn from it. You reflect. You grow. You understand that your worth isn't determined by a single moment, and that even failure has a place in your story. When you're mistreated or misunderstood, you don't rush to defend your image. You remain calm, knowing that truth will speak louder than any reaction. When you're uncertain about what comes next, you don't panic. You stay steady, trusting that guidance will come when it's needed. This is what it means to endure with faith. It is not passive waiting, it is active trust. Over time, this practice of enduring discomfort with God at the center builds something unshakable within you. You develop inner strength. You become the kind of person who doesn't quit when things get hard. You become someone others can lean on, someone who radiates calm in the chaos, someone who has peace even in the storm. And that peace isn't fake. It's not manufactured. It comes from the deep knowing that your foundation cannot be destroyed by external events. Even in your darkest seasons, when you feel isolated or overwhelmed, the habit of putting God first reminds you that you are not alone. You learn to talk to Him in the silence. You learn to lean into His presence when no one else seems to understand. You learn that strength isn't the absence of emotion. It's the decision to keep moving through emotion. It's the quiet courage to keep showing up, to keep doing the work, to keep believing that this season won't last forever, even if it feels like it already has. This kind of endurance doesn't develop quickly. It's cultivated over time, through repetition, through pain, through faithfulness. But once it takes root in your life, you become resilient in a way that the world cannot explain. You are no longer defined by what happens to you. You are defined by what you stand on. And when what you stand on is eternal, everything else loses its power to control you. That's the quiet power of putting God first. It gives you the strength to endure anything life throws at you, not by avoiding discomfort, but by finding purpose within it. Here's the expanded version of key point number 5, written in approximately 700 words without using subheadings or keywords. When you put God first, you begin to notice a shift in how you think, how you make decisions, and how you carry yourself in the world. It's not an overnight transformation, and it's rarely dramatic. It's often subtle at first. But over time, you realize that the mental clutter you used to carry, the confusion, the overthinking, the endless back and forth in your head, starts to fade. You begin to see your life through a lens that's cleaner, clearer, and more grounded. Your mind starts to operate differently. It slows down, but not in a lazy way. It slows down in a precise way. You think less about what people expect of you and more about what truly matters. That kind of clarity is not something you stumble upon. It's the result of a daily decision to center your mind on something higher. There's something powerful about knowing what matters most. When you have that kind of focus, it becomes easier to say no. It becomes easier to let go of distractions that once consumed your time and energy. You begin to pull away from things that looked urgent but weren't important. You no longer chase noise. You become intentional, calm, and clear. This isn't because you're naturally more disciplined or more organized. It's because you've started to order your mind around something constant. And when you're centered around something unchanging, your decisions no longer shift with your mood or with your circumstances. This mental clarity leads to deeper integrity. You don't just act on impulse or convenience. You act from a place of conviction. Your words match your actions, and your actions match your beliefs. You stop living a fragmented life. You stop switching between different versions of yourself depending on who's watching. Instead, you show up the same way, regardless of the room, regardless of the pressure, regardless of the outcome. And that kind of consistency builds something rare. Trust. Others begin to see it. You begin to feel it. There's no inner conflict, no pretending, just clarity, just peace. When God is first in your life, your thoughts don't just quiet down, they begin to align. You begin to think with a sense of purpose. Your thoughts are no longer chaotic or scattered. You don't waste energy trying to impress people who don't even understand your mission. You don't run yourself in circles trying to prove your worth. You already know your worth. And because of that, your mind is free, free to focus, free to create, free to rest, free to grow. That freedom is rare in a world filled with constant stimulation, and it's one of the most valuable things you can experience. There's also a deeper kind of courage that comes from this clarity. You stop being afraid to stand alone. You stop shrinking your values to fit into conversations. You don't feel the need to be louder, flashier, or more impressive. You understand that presence isn't about volume, it's about alignment.